All right, welcome to the Praxis Behind the Obscure podcast, and I have a returning guest, Sara Mastros. And so last time we talked about Solomonic magic, a little bit about her journey, and today actually I wanted to talk about the tarot. And so maybe can you share a little bit about how you personally got into the tarot, what drew you into this practice?
So, I think like honestly, most people, at least most English speaking people, my first exposure to tarot was just in like TV and movies,
Mhm.
right? And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then when I was about like 11, I found a tarot deck at a yard sale and I bought it. And it did not have, so most tarot decks, for people who don't know, they usually come with the cards. And then also in the box, you get a very short, what we call little white book, which is just like a couple of pages of like very big. Mine didn't have that. Like I had the cards, but no instructions. And for young people in the audience, like this story's set in 1989, so I couldn't just like Google it. So
Mhm.
I kind of just made up how to read tarot cards. Like they had pictures on them, and I'd seen people do it in movies. So that was like my first introduction.
Mhm.
And then I got really into the like very like deep like Kabbalistic symbolism, etc.
Mhm.
And I will say, like, now I'm kind of back to they have pictures on them, right? But I will say, like, deeply informed by
Mhm.
like all that rich symbolism that is still there in the background while I'm reading.
Mhm.
So I'd always been reading and like I would read for friends at parties and Girl Scouts and whatever. And then I'm trying to think. I think I started like professional tarot reading. I think I was just playing with tarot cards in a coffee shop. And
Mhm.
somebody sat down and said, "Oh, read for me." And then there was like a line. And then I was like,
Mhm.
could you like buy me? And then they bought my coffee. And then I was like, oh. And then I put a little sign like tarot readings $10. And then the coffee shop was like, yeah, you can't do that here. Um, which
Yeah.
which is fine. But that's sort of, and I would say I was probably in college when that happened,
Mhm.
right? And then slowly, but I went like sort of more seriously a pro reader. I would say about 10 years ago. And today, in addition to I actually don't do a lot of professional tarot reading now, but I
Okay.
do teach. It's just not my favorite of the many jobs I do.
Mhm.
It's not my favorite, and I'm like lucky enough to be in the position where mostly I only like I can choose which
Mhm.
work I want to do, and
Mhm.
I would always prefer to teach. I just like it better.
Mhm. Mhm.
Also, I think that a lot of people are good at reading tarot and less people are good at teaching tarot, so I prefer.
Mhm. Okay.
I used to teach high school. Like I enjoy teaching as an activity independent of what I'm teaching.
Okay. Okay.
But I also love tarot. And then, okay, so, and I would say, so I started sort of vaguely teaching tarot, I would say probably 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay.
And then around that same time, I met my godmother, Caroline Kenner, who, with her husband, Jason Linhart,
Mhm.
ran the Fool's Dog, which is a digital, like they publish digital tarot decks. They're
Mhm.
actually like the market leading publisher of digital tarot decks.
Mhm.
And so I got more interested in sort of like looking at different decks and like thinking about decks from a publishing angle, right?
Mm,
But
okay.
and I would occasionally do a little bit of work for them. So if you look through the decks, there's like spread by Sara Mastros, like little bits here and there. And also I did like some behind the scenes like bookkeeping type stuff.
Mhm.
But then, they're older, right? And so Jason got sick and like couldn't do it, the programming part
Mhm.
anymore.
Mhm.
And so, through a long and convoluted process I will not get into,
Mhm.
eventually, me and the current team of Full Stack, which is quite new. So, Full Stack is under
Uh-huh.
new management, right? Just quite recently. It's me. The lead programmer is my sister in law.
Oh, okay.
My godmother, Caroline, is still involved, right? And then we also have another partner, Martha, who does, think of us
Mhm.
as the four queens. So, like, Martha's the queen of coins. She does like the businessy parts.
Mhm.
Jess is the queen of swords. She does the like programming. I'm
Mm.
the queen of wands. I beat people at a club and tell them what to do. Uh, right. And Caroline is like our like public relations, I guess, right? So
Right.
she like deals with artists and authors and publishers mostly.
Nice. Nice.
And so now I do that. And so that's like being on the publishing end is really interesting
Mhm.
because I see so many decks
Mhm.
and I
Mhm.
just think about them a little differently. So overall, I would say
Mhm.
like that's my like relationship with tarot. I've
Good
never
time.
made a
Mhm.
deck of my own, but I will say one day, like I
Mhm.
have ideas, but I'm not an
Yeah.
illustrator. So one day I will find like the right illustrator partner and
Nice.
I'll make
That'd be
one
awesome.
day.
How do you use it in your personal practice in terms of, obviously you talked about reading for other people and
Right,
things
right.
like that, but do you use it, do your own personal divinations, or do you use it for any other kind of personal practice?
So a couple different ways. Like the first way is probably the most traditional, just like fortune telling. Like I want to know what's going to happen. I want some information to help me make a decision. But I will say honestly, reading for yourself
Mhm.
is a way harder than reading for other people for
Hmm.
two different reasons. Like first of all, I'm already all up in my head. Like I'm already anxious about this thing because otherwise I wouldn't really be doing this thing. Right? And so that it's hard to disambiguate that. But also, I'm all up in my own life. So, like, it's not
Mm.
that hard for me to predict my own future. I have like a lot of information. Even friends, like close friends,
Hmm.
when you read for them, you come in with like all this other stuff that
Hmm.
makes it actually much harder
Hmm.
because you care. Like, you have opinions about the question. And also, you have like you already had an answer to the like what's going to happen question before you talk to the cards.
Hmm.
So like reading for strangers is different. So I do some of that, but I will say personally, when it's something I actually care about,
Hmm.
like sometimes I'll do a little divination, like a quickie,
Hmm.
whatever. But like when it's actually something big or something I'm very emotional about, I actually get somebody else to do it. Like
Ah,
I don't
okay.
read for myself, and that is my experience. Is most like serious tarot people
Uh-huh.
agree. Like I think people are surprised to hear
Hmm.
that tarot readers often hire other tarot readers, but
Mm.
I'll also tell you chefs eat in a lot of restaurants.
Yeah, good point.
Like, you know what I mean? Like that it's a
Right.
real thing, right? Like that's my
Right.
day job. I don't want to do it for myself. Right? I also use tarot inside ritual sometimes
Hmm.
to like communicate with a spirit or something.
Hmm.
For me personally, I used to do that more,
Hmm.
but I will say these days there's just like other techniques I like better for it
Okay.
that are maybe more like advanced
Mm.
tech, like more mediumship. Like, oh, I maybe
Mm.
don't have to have this conversation via tarot because we could just have this conversation. But that took
Right.
me decades to develop that kind of skill,
Okay.
and that went through tarot, right?
Okay.
And sometimes it's a spirit that like maybe I don't want to fucking talk to them. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
tarot provides a buffer,
Right.
right? In a way that more direct, like I'm gonna get possessed and just let you talk out of my mouth
Right.
is not always a wise decision.
Right.
And then I also use tarot sort of talismanically. So
Okay.
I'll pull out a specific card and use it the way I would use like an icon of a
Hmm.
spirit,
Hmm.
but also sometimes as a like particularly like okay, so the
Hmm.
Smith Rider Waite deck, which for most Americans, if
Uh-huh.
you imagine tarot, that's what you're imagining.
Hmm.
That is less true for Europeans, right?
Mm.
But Pamela Coleman Smith, the illustrator here, let me put it. I can put it on the screen and show people the
Oh
cards
yeah,
I'm
sure.
talking.
That'd be great.
And you'll also see like okay, so this
Mm.
is the Fool's Dog app for the Smith Rider Waite. We call it Classic 1910.
Oh,
So I'm
nice.
just gonna pull up right. So I mean I'll show off more, but for now, oh, sorry, it's a little the interface now that I'm sharing my screen is not exactly what I'm using. So these are the cards I'm talking about, right?
Okay. Hmm.
So these are the major arcana, but something that distinguishes Smith Rider Waite from older decks, right?
Hmm.
Is that there are full scenes on the minor arcana, on the pip cards.
Hmm.
Whereas like in older decks, they're like playing cards. It's just like a picture of six cups with no.
Mm. Okay.
But Pamela Coleman Smith, the illustrator, she was a set designer for theater.
Hmm.
And like when I found that out, it really like deepened my understanding of these cards. So another way that I use these cards in particular is
Mm.
like it's a scene on it. I imagine it as like a theater stage,
Sure.
right? That has a set on it. And then you can like sort of astrally or imaginally, like however we want to talk about it, you can like enter into that scene
Hmm.
and like
Hmm.
what else is going on in it. And I feel like these cards, her theater background, I feel like makes these cards particularly well for that. So like
Okay.
here's a trick. I need to be in a place where I can move cards around. Okay.
Oh
So if you
wow. This is
pull
cool.
multiple, oh yeah, I'm sorry. Like I'm just flipping through. This is what the app looks like,
Oh, this
right?
is cool. Yeah.
There's a free sampler app that has cards from all different decks that I'll show you in a second.
Okay.
But like, okay, see how these really low horizons?
Yeah.
That's because they're theater sets. But also like, okay, the ones I'm pulling, they like all line up.
Hmm.
But if you pull enough of them, you'll see like if you line the horizons up
Hmm.
across the cards instead of lining the bottom of the cards up, you get kind of like a foreground and a background.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
just
Yeah, yeah,
getting
I see what
cards.
you're saying.
Okay, so this
Yeah.
one is like more obvious, right? Because
Uh-huh.
it's got like the much higher. So see how the Empress, like, oops.
Hmm.
Again, sorry, this on my laptop screen shared is like the zoom buttons are in the way when I'm trying to use. I
Yeah,
know
yeah, I
you guys
see.
can't see that, but that's why I keep bouncing back and forth. But see how like she's much forward from the other cards?
Yeah, yeah.
That's like a trick for reading these cards because they're designed as theater sets. You can like
Okay.
stack them front and back in that way, which
Hmm.
is something I particularly appreciate about this deck. So that's another way I use them. And then I also use them for sorcery in a like,
Hmm.
so this is something I do at my birthday, but
Hmm.
which is soon, right? But you could do anytime. In addition to doing like a year ahead reading,
Hmm.
divination, I also do what I call stack the deck. So
Okay.
I go through the deck and I like make up a reading. Like I think about what year I want
Hmm.
and then I make the reading for that.
Okay.
And then I used to just do that reading on top of a photocopier and like print out a copy, but now I just take a photo, but I like get it blown up poster size and I like put it on my wall where I see it all the time
Right.
as a like, I guess that's called like a vision board. But
Okay.
like, but that's really what I'm doing. And then I enchant that as if it were, because it's really like a complicated sigil, I guess.
Oh,
Like if
okay,
we
okay.
talk about how I'm doing that magic from a practical end, I'm treating that tarot spread as a sigil
Oh,
that
that's
like I create
interesting.
for this
Okay.
use, and then I enchant and cast it like sort of the same way I would any sigil.
Okay.
And I do that at my birthday, but objectively, there's no reason you couldn't do it at other times. I just personally think of that as like
Mhm.
a
Yeah,
birthday
like I said, oh,
practice
very
for
interesting. Is
me.
there specific spreads you usually use, or does it depend on the situation? Does it depend on?
I usually don't. Okay, so this is interesting because I write pre-made spreads,
Mhm.
right? So like, let me show you. Now I'm
Mhm.
going to screen share the other app. So this is the free sampler app,
Mhm.
which is free. You can read it. But if you look, so I skipped through this screen
Mhm.
before, right?
Yeah.
Like I always, honestly, 95% of the time, I'm just using freeform and I just put them where I want them to be. Like I make up a spread specifically for the question. But
Oh,
you'll see,
wow.
like
Okay,
we
that's
have
interesting. That's very
tons.
interesting.
I'll tell you if I my experience is like most like serious professional readers that's pretty common, I think.
Hmm.
More like the spreads, like you can see there's tons of spreads here, like built
Sure.
in. And like I actually wrote some of these because that's just one of the things I used to do at Fool's Dog.
Hmm.
But like so I love writing tarot spreads, but
Mm.
objectively I use them with clients because I sort of advertise that this is the exact reading I'm going to do for you,
Okay.
right? But like for me, I usually kind of decide relative to the question what I'm
Mhm.
going to do. But I will say broadly, here
Mhm.
are some that I really like.
Mhm.
So timelines are my favorite. Like I
Timeline.
just make time, like I just make it like what how is this going to play out, and then I just put some, and I decide in advance on like a scale for the timeline, which
Mhm.
is related to the question, right? So
Okay.
like some questions I'm if I'm asking about like a court case,
Sure.
I'm not really asking what's going to happen tomorrow. It's like I'm
Mhm.
asking over a long period of time,
Right.
right? But some things like how's my date going to go? Like,
Yeah.
at least for me, hashtag
Yeah.
why I'm single, that's not a long term question, you know?
Right, right, right.
So I like timelines,
Okay.
right? Especially for questions that are like that the essence of the question is like, when is this gonna happen?
Hmm.
The,
Hmm.
it's hard to get that answer out of it. So other people read them differently. They would say, like, oh, if you get clubs,
Hmm.
like it's the number and then it's that many weeks because clubs means weeks and like
Hmm.
whatever. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I just think it's hard. And I will say most people don't seem like it's most people seem like they're not getting good answers out of that. But I think a
Hmm.
timeline is just easier.
Okay.
Another thing I really like is three cards.
Okay.
What, why,
Hmm.
how?
What?
Which
Why?
is usually right. And so here's usually it's like there's a situation that is bad.
Okay.
So like this started off as it's really like an am I cursed reading, but like in other context, like less intense context. So it's like really I'm asking what is the true nature of the situation?
Hmm.
Why is it happening?
Hmm.
How can I improve it?
Okay. I
And
like
I sort of learned that reading from Ellen Lorenzi Prince as Dark Goddess Tarot.
that.
But I
Okay.
will say the way I do it is so far removed from the way I learned it. Like I'm gonna give her credit because she's awesome,
Hmm.
but that's not real. But I also want to be clear, that's not how she says that. Like she would do it
Hmm.
differently, which is also good. I just, like anything else, as you use it over time.
Sure.
And then what are some other spreads I really like? I do sometimes like elemental grids. So I'll look
Okay.
like, what is like the earthy element of this situation?
Okay.
Like, what is the airy element? And that's especially if I'm doing like big readings
Hmm.
or like long term readings. So another thing I do at birthdays or New Year's is like I have the four elements and then I do crossway. So it's 16 cards that way,
Hmm.
elements, and then down in seasons. So you
Okay.
kind of get a snapshot of like what the like different themes of the year would be. And it's different for different people, but like the earth row is
Hmm.
usually money. Sometimes it's physical health, sometimes
Hmm.
it's housing, but for most people, it ends up being money.
Mm.
Right. And then the air for most people is career,
Hmm.
because in today's world, most people actually have, like, most people actually are like college workers in some kind
Hmm.
of way.
Hmm.
So, like, it depends on what your career is, but that's often like in the air row.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
Fire is sometimes sex, it's sometimes
Okay.
conflict. It's
Okay.
for artists, it's almost always about their art, like not
Hmm.
their career element, but the actual art. For magicians, it's almost always about magic in that
Hmm.
row. But that's the one that like is, our culture doesn't really
Mm.
approve of fiery activities. So they play
Sure,
out
sure.
differently in different people's stuff. And then water is sometimes about like romantic relationships,
Okay.
but I find it's more often about like it's about interpersonal relationships broadly.
Okay.
And for most people, it's usually mostly family.
Hmm. Hmm.
But sometimes, especially for younger people, it'll be more about like romance
Mm. Okay.
in that
Okay.
era. It's like everything else. Like as a tarot reader, you gotta like know what you're doing.
Right.
The readings, like this is not. I'm not saying people are doing it wrong,
Hmm.
but like my personal preference, the kind of readings where it's like this card is your hopes and this
Hmm.
card is your fears. I just don't. They're not my favorite. Like
Okay.
I'd prefer to like look at all the cards, like even in like that elemental grid where I mean, every card has a specific value,
Hmm.
but I'm really looking at like the whole thing. And so you can watch when you do those readings,
Hmm.
like you can see how, like, oh, if you look, like there's this like slidey row of swords that kind of like there's swords falling down your grid. And
Mm.
so you'll see like, oh, this is something that started off as money anxiety,
Uh-huh.
but then it became this, and now you're fighting with your spouse about it. And you can watch, like you can watch visually the themes like roll around. So you can look at like
Right.
who's looking at who. And sometimes like somebody will like visually it'll appear that like one card is like handing an object to another card
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
those sort of things. I would say those sort of details are really where I see the difference between like beginner readers and more experienced readers.
So for
Is that I think
beginners, it is
beginner
good to use like a more simple spread, would you say? Just to kind of get your
Here's what I will say.
used
I
to
think
it.
more than 5 cards at a time is too
Mhm.
many cards for beginners. I
Okay.
think beginners should normally, most of the time, be
Mhm.
putting down 3 questions. And if they feel like
Mhm.
their question is so complicated, they should, instead of doing a giant reading,
Mhm.
they should like figure out how that question is actually 4 different questions and they should ask themselves.
Mm, okay.
But that is, I
Got
want
it.
to be clear, that is like a teacher advice.
Sure.
Like I'm just saying it's easier in the beginning. So a beginner tarot reader, like you're going to start off with this place means this place means
Hmm.
this card means this card means this. But if that's what tarot was, then
Hmm.
like AI could do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
I mean, like a computer can do. It doesn't even have to be AI. Like a regular computer can do
Right.
that. Like that's a magic 8 ball,
Hmm.
and that's fun. Like there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying like, oh, it's disrespectful to the spirit of tarot. Like tarot actually started off as a playing card game. Like it's a
Sure.
game,
Sure.
right? So it's not like disrespectful. It's just like it's of limited utility reading that
Right.
way. It's just
Right.
like a stage you move through on the way to getting better at it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like I think of there's 2 beginner ways to read cards, and one of them is what I just said, like sort of algorithmically. This card means this, and just put those in a row. And then the other one is they have pictures on them,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And I think for beginners, it's good to train like both of those methods. So when I teach, I sometimes make people read playing cards, so there's no picture to rely on. And
Mm.
then I also make people read ridiculous, badly designed oracle decks.
Mhm.
So like you can't read them coherently because whoever made them doesn't know how divination works, but you have this series of pictures that you interpret somehow.
Mm.
And so I think if you individually train both of those skills, that's helpful. But
Mhm.
tarot reading relies on both of those skills and another skill, which is like divination qua divination,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is really being very good at guessing. Like
Mm.
at its core, that's what divination is. It is the magic of making very reliable guesses.
Mm-hmm. So it's sort of using
And
your
that's what
intuition based on the question and the cards and the
I think that is
imagery and
one way to do it. I
Mhm.
will say that, like, traditionally, like, it's called divination because it's not your intuition, your inner teacher.
Sure.
It's an external divinity that you are asking,
Okay. Yeah.
right? And those, like, as a person who does both of those kinds,
Hmm.
they come out different. Like, it's important to know who you're asking when you
Okay.
ask a question, right?
Mhm.
Because if I ask my intuition a question, and then I ask my ancestors a question, and then I ask like Aphrodite a question, I'm gonna get different. Here's the example I normally give. Imagine I'm like looking for a new apartment,
Okay.
and there's like two possible apartments, and my question is like, which should I pick, apartment A or apartment B?
Hmm.
Like if I ask my ancestors, they're gonna be like, oh, you should live in apartment A. It's right down the street from your grandmother. Like you'll have such a rich family life.
Uh-huh.
Fine. And if you ask Aphrodite, she's gonna be like, "Oh, you should pick apartment B because the guy who lives next door is really hot,
You're
right?" And there's like a love connection there.
right.
And
Right.
if you ask like the Archangel Michael, he's gonna be like, "You should live in a cardboard box. You will suffer and become very enlightened."
Yeah. Right.
Right? And none of those are actually the answer I wanted. Like,
Sure.
right? So I think it's important to know who you're at. That's another,
Hmm.
like, I would say, beginner divination tip.
Okay.
Is especially when you're asking for like advice,
Sure.
it is better, in my opinion, not to ask advice from tarot cards. Like it's better to ask for information and
Mm,
then use that information to make a decision.
I see.
But a lot of people want to ask for advice, and there are situations that, so a better question than like which of these apartments should I be
Hmm.
would be like, what are all, like, give me a pro and con list for apartment A and a pro and con list for apartment B. Like I think you get a better answer that way.
So kind of broadening your perspective on given situations, giving you different views, different information
Yes.
that you can make a better decision based off of.
I think always, like, you should go into divination. The goal should be to acquire information that you are going to use to make a decision,
Okay. Yes.
right?
Yes.
But a lot of people use it to, for example, treat anxiety or
Okay.
make decisions for them. And
Okay.
those are not entirely healthy ways to do. You know,
Sure.
divination can be addictive, the same way that gambling is addictive. Like
Sure.
I would wager it's exactly the same like neurological way,
Okay.
right? And we all do it. Like it's not like I've never flipped tarot cards like loves me not, loves me. Like we've all done it,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And it's just not healthy or good. It's like
Yeah.
junk food. You know what I mean? Like a little bit here
Yeah.
and there, fine. But
Sure.
like if you find yourself asking the tarot the same question over and over for days in a row, like you have a problem. And
Right.
we're laughing, but like it's easy to fall into that habit. And as
Sure.
a professional, that happens. Like I cut people off. I'm like, no, I will not read for you again, actually. You
Okay.
should not. I mean, I'm sure they just hire somebody else. Just like as a bartender, when you cut somebody off, they just go next door to that bar and
Right.
drink
Right.
there.
Right.
But like
Yeah.
for a while, you know what I mean? Like somebody will always overserve you,
Sure. Sure.
but
Sure. That makes sense.
that's not going
Um,
to be me.
yeah, that makes sense. Can you talk a little bit about the history? So you mentioned that they were used as playing cards, right? The original tarot decks.
Yeah,
Can you
so
give us a little background about, how it developed into maybe this divination system that we see today?
sure. So playing cards entered Europe
Hmm.
from China, but by way of Ottoman traders. And that happens around 1300, right? They're used, as far as we know, exclusively for gameplay. Like there's no talk of anybody reading fortunes with them
Hmm.
until around like the late 1400s, where you start to hear some, but it's not really clear. Like there's not, nobody knows what they're doing, right?
Okay.
Similarly, in Italy, around 1400s, there's this new game called Tarocchi, which
Hmm.
takes what we would think of as normal playing cards, more or less,
Hmm.
and adds to them these allegorical trump cards,
Okay.
which the earliest ones, sometimes they're Greek gods,
Hmm.
sometimes they're virtues.
Hmm.
So, like, faith and love and like Christian virtues.
Hmm.
Sometimes they're biblical allegories, like biblical stories. So, like the Tower of Babel or like the Final Judgment. And over time, right, those coalesced into what we would now think of as the tarot,
Hmm.
more or less.
Hmm.
by like maybe the 1500s, mostly in Italy,
Okay.
right? So I don't have all these dates right at hand. I know I
Sure,
should
sure.
because I teach this material. But like, like if you watch Free Lesson Zero, I do
Hmm.
have exact dates for all these things on a
Okay.
slide, but off the top of my head, I don't know the exact dates.
Hmm.
And then starting around and at that point they okay, so this is what let me show. This is what Tarot de Marseille looks like, which is really the oldest form ish of like
Hmm.
what we think of as tarot,
Okay.
right? So like here's what the major this is a particular one. This is a later this is not an antique like a scan of an antique deck, and you can tell because of the like multiple color printing.
Okay.
Like some advances in tarot cards are about advances in printing technology, right? So like what really happens during that time is also like the invention of cheap printing, which
Hmm.
takes tarot cards from something that used to be super expensive because they had to be hand painted. So like
Right.
only nobles had them. But
Hmm.
now there's relatively cheap printing available. So
Hmm.
now like there's something that like regular people can own,
Okay.
right? And so you can see here, this is what I was saying, like they don't have scenes. So this is staves in this deck, wands, batons, whatever it's called. You can see
Hmm.
like there's no picture, right? So like what does the three of wands mean? Like you have to just know what the three of wands. You have to know
Yeah.
what wands mean and what the number three means.
Sure, sure. That
Right.
makes
But like,
sense.
right. And so then we move on. So from here, right, over
Mhm.
time, we move into so this is what we've been looking at, this Rider Smith.
Rider
Okay,
Waite.
it's there are multiple names. So there's three people involved.
Hmm.
There's Ryder, who's the publisher. He didn't do anything. Like he's just the money. So
Right.
why do we put his name first? I don't know. Arthur Edward Waite wrote the book that goes with it.
Okay. Hmm.
Pamela Coleman Smith, also called Pixie Smith,
Hmm.
illustrated them. And it's not like Waite gave her sketches and she made them better. Like
Sure.
she turned his description into a picture.
Mm.
So like a lot of times when we call it Rider Waite, we're just like ignoring her completely. So,
The one
but
who
the
actually
order,
did the drawings, right?
yeah, the person who like actually
Yeah.
made the deck.
Right,
And
right.
is that because she's a woman? You know, maybe. Is it because
Yeah.
Arthur Edward Waite is a douchebag? Like that's definitely true. Like if you learn anything about him historically, you'll be like, oh yeah, this is not a
Not a good
good
guy.
person.
Yeah.
Ryder, I don't know anything about him, but
Okay.
as far as I know, he's just the money. Like I don't think he did anything with it.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
sometimes you'll hear it called RWS, Ryder Waite Smith.
Okay.
I usually call it Smith Ryder Waite, but I still use the abbreviation RWS.
Okay.
So it's like in a state of flux. Exactly. So that's why you'll hear it with different names.
Hmm.
Also, I will say US Games
Hmm.
has been until this year
Hmm.
defending a spurious copyright claim. Like they
Mm.
claim to own a copyright on this, which no, they do not. Like no reasonable, including courts, disagree. But you
Right.
have to like spend a bajillion dollars to fight them. So you'll
Right.
also see with other names. So for example, we
Sure.
call this the classic 1910.
Okay. Okay.
But even the shitty copyright that they're pretending that like isn't real, that
Hmm.
also expired now, like just bare. Like in I believe January 1st it
Hmm.
expired,
Hmm.
but maybe even last year.
Hmm.
Anyway, so you can see these have these full scene illustrations, which
Hmm.
like, and this came out around 1910,
Okay.
right? And this deck also incorporates, this deck is intended to be like magical or
Wasn't
like
Wait, was he in the
mystical.
Golden Dawn or
Wait,
wasn't
yeah,
he?
all of
Yeah.
those people, like all three
Yeah.
of them, I believe, were in the Golden Dawn,
Okay.
right?
Okay. Hmm.
Um, and so this is not exactly, it's not like an inner secret Golden Dawn deck,
Hmm.
which also exists,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
this is like the Golden Dawn's PR material,
Mm.
right? And it introduces a lot of there are changes.
Hmm.
So like a card in Marseille and a card in Rider Waite do
Hmm.
not always mean the same thing.
Okay.
And that is particular. Let me show you a couple of specific cards. So I
Hmm.
think I can only show you one deck at once because of the way I have it set up. So let
Hmm.
me first show you the Lovers is a good example. So
Hmm.
this is the Lovers card in Smith Rider Waite, right? It depicts Adam and Eve and an angel who I believe to be Raphael.
Okay.
Like the artist tells me that that's Raphael. That's how I know,
Hmm.
right? I mean, it's my job to know, but like,
Yeah, right.
right, I'm saying it's not like I am looking at this picture and be like, oh yeah, that's Raphael,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Okay,
Yeah.
now let me show you the Lovers card in Marseille.
Okay. Oh, I
So
think
when
you
we
know
get
what? I
this,
think you have to share. I think it didn't share.
oh right, okay,
Mhm.
sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, share, and now I want to share this one.
Working. Oh yeah.
Okay.
There we go. There we go.
And where is my Lovers? Here we go.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, right. And here you can see it's a very different illustration. It's this
Mm-hmm.
guy
Hmm.
choosing, but like, you know that meme where the guy's like turning away from his girlfriend? Like, look, that's this card. And that is a very different, like,
Yeah.
divinatory meaning than
Sure.
I know you guys can't see them both, but like they're very different. And that's an
Yeah.
extreme example. Like I would say the Lovers is one of the there are some cards that like really changed and others
Sure.
less so. But like it's
Yeah.
important to understand that when you read tarot, right? That like the same card does not always mean the same thing in different decks.
Sure, sure. I was
And
just thinking,
so
like, are these are tarots kind of like original memes back in the day? Like this is the meme for this situation, you know? Like,
yeah, and
yeah.
based in biblical allegory. So they're pulling out of these
Hmm.
pre-existing like cultural memes that people were already familiar with,
Mm,
right? So
okay.
like
Hmm.
and sometimes that's more obvious than at other times,
Hmm.
but like if we go and look at like okay, so people often get confused between justice,
Hmm.
which is about courts.
Hmm.
Like it's pretty literally about court. I mean, not always. Sometimes it's a metaphor, but like if a justice card comes up, I do think like, this person's going to be a court,
Mm.
right? And judgment, which is the final judgment. Like this is the archangel Gabriel rise, like waking the dead at the final judgment.
Uh-huh.
That's what this is a picture of. And like, I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in that whole like
Hmm.
final judgment eschatology, but
Hmm.
that's what this is an illustration of. Right?
Mm.
Like it's a pre-existing image that was like already in the culture that
Right.
is being drawn on. And similarly, like what's another one? Like the tower. Like that's the
Yeah.
Tower of Babel. That
Hmm.
that's what like that's what that is a picture of.
Hmm.
And so knowing that, like, it informs your reading of it.
Okay.
And I didn't like not having grown up Christian, that was not immediately apparent to me.
Mm,
Like I
okay.
didn't know that that was the final. I was like, what is going on in this card? Like,
Right.
right? But like learning that like you it's not that you have to read them as a Christian, but that's the
Sure.
story that is being referenced.
Sure.
When
Sure.
you know that, then when you see that card, you get this whole complicated backstory
Hmm.
that comes with it, right? And all the
Right.
cards are like that, but
Hmm.
particularly the major arcana.
Okay, okay. But the Marseille, they're using different imagery that's not it has some correlation to the
I mean, a
Christian.
lot of
Uh-huh.
them are quite similar, right? Like
Okay.
the Marseille deck is also predominantly Christian imagery,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So, like, I showed the Lovers as an example, but like, I do want to be clear. That's maybe, I would say, of all the cards, that's the one that I picked specifically to show you they're different.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
here's a more, right? So you can see, like, that's basically the same picture
Okay.
of judgment, right? Like, let's see. This is basically the same picture as a turn. So like some of them
Yeah.
change and some of them don't. I like when I showed the Lovers, I picked that one to show you how it changed.
I see, I see. Okay.
Right. So some of them are more similar than others, but they all have like different details
Hmm.
that play out in different ways. So like
Hmm.
I will say something that is not so present here. In the Rider Waite deck, this guy would have a crown on, and this guy
Okay.
would be wearing like peasant clothes, and
Hmm.
it would more clearly articulate that like this is calamity for everyone.
Mm,
Like
okay.
the whole thing's coming down,
Got it, got it.
right? Which is, I mean, is also true in this tower card, but is
Hmm.
like not as clearly represented in the image. I think to me, I
Mm.
mean, more, different people have different preferences. So it's
Sure.
not really that, like, some people will be like, oh, it's the Marseille, and then Rider Waite Smith corrupts that. Like,
Right.
they're different.
Right.
And, some decks I would say corrupted, like they're just bad. Like I was saying before, some
Sure.
decks, it's very clear that the
Hmm.
person who made that deck just wanted to draw 78 pictures
Hmm.
and didn't really think about how it worked. Like
Yeah.
a random collection of 78 pictures doesn't
Well,
work
well, there are
for
some
divination.
weird tarot, aren't there? Like, I don't know. I've seen some weird ones where they don't even
Yeah.
look like they
And
have any stories behind them or anything connected, you know? Yeah.
So now I will show you.
Yeah.
I was not expecting to show off the app this much, but I'm
Okay.
glad that I have it here. So
Yeah.
this is our free sampler deck,
Uh-huh.
right? So here we can say, like, let's look at the lovers. Here's like
Oh,
six
interesting.
different lovers cards from 6 out of our 100
Um,
decks,
oh, wow. Okay.
right?
Okay.
And so you can see like these that we pulled, like this one,
Hmm.
not my favorite deck. Like this one is pretty clearly just the Smith Rider Waite. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember, but even like this is the same tree.
Hmm.
Like this burning bush here, that's also right. And this one, it's still got like the tree and the serpent, so
Hmm.
like similar, right?
Okay. Hmm.
And then some of them like are becoming less, but none of these that happened to come up, like it's random, right? And it's
Sure.
not random. Every time you hit lovers, you're going to see one of these six. We can't give you all the cards for free because
Right.
then our artists don't get paid. So,
Right.
it like every time you
You're
pull the
saying that
lovers
they
in this
have the
deck, you're going to get
essential
one of them.
elements within, despite the drawings being different or the imagery, but they do have the essential elements of the two people.
They're all tarots, and we don't publish tarots that we think are garbage. But yes,
Right.
all of these are Smith Rider Waite. They're all like a heterosexual couple. This guy, let's make him bigger. That's cool. This one's got, I think, 2 men up here and 2 women down here. It looks like
Okay. Hmm.
it's a little hard to see on my screen. Right, there's another thing. I mean, I can zoom in on the cards too, but I think if I try and zoom while I'm screen sharing, that'll be a disaster. Truthfully, like,
Yeah.
I
Right.
think I'll like lose my controls and not be able to get. I'm not
Right.
very tech savvy about. I don't do the screen sharing thing that often.
Right.
Um,
This is cool. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, so you can see like, but all of those happen to be Smith Horowitz. So let's look at which was another one that we looked at. We also looked at like judgment, right? So here's a bunch of judgments, and here you can see
Hmm.
none of them really. Like this one is maybe a little. This one is recognizably
Uh-huh.
like it's got the angel and the, but these like if you hadn't told me this was a picture of justice, I would not necessarily know that. But then
Mm.
when I look, it's the phoenix.
Hmm.
And I understand the relationship of the phoenix
Hmm.
to like the final judgment where the dead rise again.
Uh,
Right?
okay, sure.
You know what I mean? So like the more you know
Right.
it, or like this, I understand this is Zombie Tarot is a cool one, I will say.
That's pretty
Like
cool. I like that one. I
I
like that.
like this image. These are all, I mean, I don't Wildwood is a great tarot.
Uh-huh.
I don't play favorites. I mean, we don't publish decks that we think are bad. Like
Sure,
we're
sure.
like here I will tell you in the this week we have
Mhm.
turned down like 5 decks.
Okay.
Like we turn down the overwhelming majority of decks we get
Hmm.
offered.
Hmm.
Basically, like we only publish the ones that we think are good, but still different people have different styles. So I will say
Sure.
of me, like for me, this one I quite like Wildwood.
Hmm.
Whereas this is cool and it has cool art. It's just not my personal favorite. But
Hmm.
like everybody's different, you know. Here's a bunch of different devil cards,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, that is cool.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't even remember why I brought that up. Oh, just say that like
Hmm.
the different interpretations are different, but I do think that when people are learning,
Hmm.
and this is what I teach when I teach tarot, I think the best thing to learn is both Smith
Okay.
Rider Waite and Marseille. I
Okay.
think ideally you sort of cross train in those
Okay.
because almost all tarot, almost all modern tarot
Hmm.
is in some way like derived from one or both of those. Like sometimes it remixes the two together, but
Okay.
some of them you saw were straight up clones. It's just the same image drawn differently, right? But in terms of meaning, like
Hmm.
almost all decks are one of those two. So I think if you learn those,
Hmm.
so in Getting Good at Tarot, which is the tarot course I teach it with my colleague Marco. So I
Okay.
teach RWS and he teaches Marseille. And
Mhm.
so you see the two different decks and you also see like our two different styles.
Okay. Hmm.
Believer, I think I said this in our previous podcast too. I'm a big believer in cross training, like
Right.
magically, but also everything, because I think it's really easy to
I think
like
everything in general, it's more useful.
exactly.
Right?
It's
Yeah.
I think it's easy to get in a rut and be
Yeah.
like, oh, this is the way you got to do it. But I'll tell you, Marco and I read tarot quite differently.
Hmm.
But one thing that we do in class is both of us will read the same question.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
sometimes,
Okay.
hilariously, we get quite similar cards.
Right.
So in lesson 0, let me see if I remember. The question we asked was, how can students get the most out of this course?
Hmm. Hmm.
And he went first and he
Hmm.
got uh, devil,
Hmm.
No, his devil was last.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Hmm.
It was going to be good too. We both, okay, he
Yeah.
got, I think, something. I don't remember what. Maybe lovers.
Okay.
Maybe. Oh no, he got. Let me think. He got the world. I
Okay.
think his went Hanged Man, World, Devil.
Okay.
Right, and which he said basically was like, look at things from a different perspective.
Hmm.
Like it opens up the world, and then you
Okay.
learn to read like the devil. I will say, when you're asking about magic or about tarot, like
Yeah.
usually the devil card is about like temptation or addiction or something like that.
Okay.
But when you're reading about magic, it's also about, devil shit.
Hmm.
Reading
Hmm.
tarot, doing sorcery. So,
Sure.
like, in those kinds of readings. And then I got Hanged Man.
Hmm.
No, I got Devil. I got the Devil, the Empress, and the Hanged Man, but I don't remember what one. So we got 2 out of 3 of the same cards.
Wow. Wow.
And then where he had the world, I had the Empress. And in other ways, those are like quite similar.
Hmm.
And so, like, but we read them very different. Like, we arrived at the
Hmm.
same conclusion. Like,
Okay.
both of us essentially arrived at the conclusion that, like, how you get the most out of it is, like, be open to new perspectives, do the work,
Hmm.
and, like,
Hmm.
open yourself up to devilry. Like, that was basically both of our answers. But we
Right.
did it very differently. And other times we'll get totally different cards
Sure.
that we read very differently, but we still get the same answer because there is a
Hmm.
correct answer.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, like, the skill of divination is that you get the right answer.
Right.
And different people do that differently. And
Sure.
the same person does that differently in different contexts. And that's why I'm a big believer in like learning from multiple teachers and multiple systems at the same time, which
Okay.
at the
That makes sense.
beginning can be a little confusing. Like, you really do need good teachers to do that
Right.
because
Right.
it's a
Right.
little confusing, but I think it pays really good dividends. So
Okay.
that's like how our course works, is we teach both of those. But
Okay.
whether you take our course or not, I do recommend for beginners, like,
Hmm.
you should be starting with minimally either
Hmm.
RWS or Marseille, but I would say
Okay.
both. And that doesn't mean you can't also read other decks,
Sure.
but you should learn those, because once you unlock those, you'll be able to read anything.
Yeah, once you're comfortable with one or two decks, then it's easier to kind of move on to using other
Yeah, and
decks,
it's
basically.
like
Yeah.
other decks,
Uh-huh.
decks where like the art is gorgeous,
Uh-huh.
but like it has a bias. So some decks, and sometimes if you know that, that's good.
Hmm.
So like, okay, and sometimes the other way. So Deviant Moon is
Hmm.
a deck I quite like. Let me see if
Hmm.
I have any pictures of that. I don't think I have that app on my laptop,
Deviant Moon.
but I think I have pictures of it in the sampler. Decks. Let's see if it actually. I think it has pictures. I usually do it on an iPad where the interface is slightly different. In case people were wondering why I don't know how to use my own app, it's
Yeah.
because I'm normally doing it on the iPad.
Sure.
Where is? Okay, for whatever reason, I can't find it right now. But I'll just say, like, the
Hmm.
art style is not my favorite.
Okay.
Like, I mean, it's not that it's bad. It's gorgeous. He's like an excellent artist. It's just maybe not my thing.
Hmm.
But like, my godmother talked me into this deck. She's like, no, no, try it.
Hmm.
And it reads so well, but like, it has a bias. And its bias
Hmm.
is that it thinks everyone is like sneaky and underhanded and is like scamming behind your back. And like, for tarot, that's good. Like, honestly,
Yeah.
when you're reading tarot, it's normally because something shady is going on.
Sure.
But like, you have to know that about that deck. Like, that's always it always comes out that way because that's kind of like its vocabulary,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And some decks, like Deviant Moon, is good and
Okay.
well balanced, but some decks, the way I think about it is like, you're trying to have a conversation with this deck,
Hmm.
but the deck only knows 78 words.
Mm.
Like, it has to use those 78 words to communicate. And some decks, they don't really have 78 words because like all of
Mm.
their answers are like, oh, everything's okay, just like a inner teacher. And like,
Yeah.
that's advice, but like, actually, that is not like, if every card is that, like, you
Sure.
didn't tell me anything. And sometimes I need a warning. Like, sometimes I need to be like, no,
Mm.
no, this is bad, run away. And some
Right.
decks, it's
Okay.
hard to get them to say that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like, they don't have the vocabulary to say that. So that's what I mean about
Yeah.
like different decks. Like, from my point of view, there are different things that make a deck good or bad.
Okay.
As a reader, And then as a publisher, there's like some other criteria,
Hmm.
right? But the first one is like the art just has to be like,
Hmm.
good. And that
Okay.
doesn't mean like different styles of art. Like there of
Hmm.
the 100 decks we carry,
Hmm.
I will say maybe 20 of them are decks that like I personally like love, like I use them, like that art really speaks to me.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it's not that the other art is bad. It's just like not
Sure.
my thing. Like I
Sure.
get it. I understand why that's good art. I understand the person who likes it.
Hmm.
I'm just maybe not that person. But I read with them all because it's my job. Like I want to be familiar with them. Right. But then so
Okay.
that's one way. And then there's this other way where like the person does have to have like a depth of understanding about divination.
Okay.
Like tarot isn't a random collection of images. It's like
Hmm.
very specifically sort of fine tuned to
Hmm.
be able to answer questions.
Hmm.
And some decks, like it's pretty clear that that person didn't. And there's a third thing where most decks,
Hmm.
like particularly like we don't know who made the Mercedes deck, right? But like Smith Rider Waite, as I mentioned, it's an author and an illustrator. And
Right.
most decks, that's the case.
Okay. Okay.
Decks that are made by a single person,
Hmm.
sometimes they're really in their own like headspace. So like there's
Hmm.
one tarot person I'm not gonna name who I love. I think they're amazing. I would love to carry their decks.
Hmm.
For whatever reason, they clearly associate the Four of Cups with elephants. Like,
Okay.
and they've made 20 decks and like 15 of them have an elephant. But why? I
Yeah.
don't know. That's like their own personal symbolism.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
And so sometimes when the artist and the author are the same person, sometimes it can be very personal, which is great for
Mm.
that person, but I am not privy to all that stuff.
Right.
And you did not tell me about it.
Right.
Whereas
Right.
when there's an artist and an illustrator, they at least have to be able to explain it to each other.
Sure. Sure. That makes sense.
So, pro tip generally, I find,
Yeah.
not always, there are many decks where like
Hmm.
one person was great at everything. But for the
Hmm.
most part, I personally find that if the artist and the author are different people,
Yeah.
maybe better.
Interesting. Well, do you have any thoughts on the Thoth, the Crowley deck? Because that's another pretty
Okay,
popular one, isn't it?
yeah, so we don't carry that deck because the copyright holder will not license it to us. But
Mm.
let me show, we have a deck called Liberty, which
Oh,
is
okay.
relatively similar.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, I'm not sharing. Here we go. Which is, I don't have it on my laptop, so I can only show you like a couple of the cards. But
Okay.
like you can see, if you know the Thoth deck,
Oh,
as
yeah.
soon as you
Uh-huh.
look at these, you'd be like, oh, this is Thoth, but somebody just
Yeah.
redrew this, right?
Very
Which is
similar.
gorgeous. I
Hmm.
will say I actually like this art better than Frida Harris's
Mm.
art. So Thoth was written shortly after
Hmm.
RWS. So that shortly, I mean, in the span of history, shortly.
Hmm.
I should know because I'm supposed to know this sort of thing as a tarot
Hmm.
teacher. I'm gonna say I think it probably came out World War II-ish. So let's say
Yeah.
1940-ish. But I don't exactly know,
Maybe
right?
20,
And
30
I think
years after the
yeah,
writer.
and I think it was created earlier. Like the art style leads me to believe it was created actually in like the early 30s. But
Hmm.
maybe she was just like,
Hmm.
I mean, I don't really know. I'm not an art historian, right?
Right.
It's created by two people, right? The author is Aleister Crowley,
Hmm.
and the illustrator is Lady Frida Harris,
Hmm.
right? And so Thoth, it really it's based on Marseille. So the
Hmm.
changes that are made in RWS, for the most part, Thoth is not like it's closer to Marseille.
Okay.
It doesn't have exactly full scene illustrated pips. So you see, where's a pip?
Hmm.
Okay, so here, right, you can see this is the
Hmm.
Two of Wands.
Hmm.
And it's not exactly a scene, but
Mm.
it's like kind of a scene,
Mm.
right? Or like here's the Ace of Discs, it looks like. They're really small on my screen. I don't know if they're bigger on yours.
Hmm.
Um, or like here, right, we have this looks like the 10 of Wands, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so you can see like they're kind of full scene because I think they're sort of I would say Thoth, the goal of the Thoth deck is to like
Hmm.
go back to the Marseille like reading style, but incorporate some of the better changes of RWS. But
Hmm.
in terms of reading, like Thoth is a Marseille deck,
Okay.
right? Like Thoth cards mean the same things they mean in Marseille more so than in RWS. Personally, I love Thoth, and it's the deck I use when I was really getting serious about tarot. It's the deck I learned on.
Oh,
But
interesting. Okay. Hmm.
I will say I don't it's kind of hard to read. Like it's not
Mm.
necessarily the most beginner friendly deck.
Yeah,
So
the
definitely
images look a
play
little
with
more
it.
abstract compared to the previous two.
Yeah, the art style is more impenetrable, but also like it's remember what I was saying about like Marseille
Mhm.
and RWS to a slightly lesser extent? They're built out of these like biblical allegories,
Right.
right? That like even if you're not like even if you don't grow up in that culture, the thing about Christians force feeding us their culture all the time is that like you still know those stories,
Right, right, right.
right? Like even if you don't want to. Like I'll say, as a person with a lot of like pagan friends trying to keep their kids from learning that, it's
Right.
actually quite hard too. Like everybody
Yeah.
knows the Bible stories, at least in the States, right?
Yeah.
Um, and but Thoth has its own complicated, sort of esoteric mythology behind it
Hmm.
that like
Hmm.
you kind of already have to know to
Right.
read them. Right. So
Hmm.
like if you're super into Aleister Crowley and his whole thing,
Hmm.
definitely Thoth. And I love Thoth. I think it's beautiful. I mean, again, this is not the Thoth deck. This is a different artist
Right.
interpreting Thoth, but it's quite similar. Like if you know Thoth,
Hmm.
you would look at it. And I don't if whoever owns the copyright on Thoth, which I think is the OTO.
Oh,
Like
it
if
makes
you
sense.
guys
Yeah.
would like to license that to us, we would very much like to license it. And
Yeah.
like we're serious readers, we're serious teachers. Like we do not I
Hmm.
think a lot of people, when they think about digital tarot decks, they think it's a magic 8 ball. Like it's a fun
Hmm.
game. And I understand why they think that because, like, I am not throwing shade, but like,
Sure.
if I look at the other ones on the market,
Hmm.
the overwhelming majority of them are that. So,
Are
like,
using it in
Deckable.
that way. Yeah.
Here's what I will say Deckable is like one of our, I guess, competitors. I don't feel like I'm in competition with them, but they seem to
Sure.
think they're in competition with us. They tried to buy us out.
Uh,
They tried to buy us out and they were like, we're like Kindle for decks. And I'm like, oh, so you're gonna just not pay artists? Like we make 50% royalty. Like that was not a
That's probably
selling
not the
point,
best
guys. Like
analogy.
like buy from Amazon. So that was not a good, but that is what they are. And I will tell
We're
you
like a
that
sweatshop. Do you want to join us?
I'll tell you that that company, like unless something has changed in the last few months, not a single person anywhere in that company reads tarot.
Okay.
But every person in our company reads tarot. Many of us like
Mhm.
very seriously for
Mhm.
like between the four of us, I think there is more than a century of tarot readings. No
Wow.
question.
Mhm.
Just between Caroline and I, there probably is.
Wow.
I mean, I'm also like the youngest person in this company, so
Mhm.
there's a little bit of it. But like, right?
Right.
But no, it's centuries, maybe plural. And
Mhm.
also we really collaborate with artists and authors. We pay a 50% royalty,
Awesome. That's awesome.
which I mean, I don't know if other people work in publishing, but I'll tell you, like on a book, I make a
Yeah, that's not,
10%
you're never going to
royalty.
get 50% on a
Yeah.
book.
No,
Yeah.
50. So we pay a 50% royalty. Here's what on a $4 app, just to
Mhm.
give people like a behind the scenes tour of like the
Yeah.
business world.
Right.
If you pay a $4 app,
Mhm.
Google/Apple, whichever like
Yeah.
platform you bought it on, they take $1 for
Mhm.
doing basically nothing.
Right. Right.
Um, of what's left,
Uh-huh.
the artist makes half, and then our company all together, like me, all four of us,
Yeah.
plus all the like operating costs,
Sure. Sure.
comes
Sure.
out of the other 50%. So on a
Right.
$4 app, I make about 25 cents personally
Right. Right.
out of
Right.
that $4. The artist and author make about $2, unless so this is just the audience. If you know anyone who is making a tarot deck,
Mhm.
if when they're talking to a publisher,
Mhm.
tell them to not sell their digital rights, which
Okay.
like the publisher will not put up a fuss.
Mhm.
And like I'm not throwing my publishing partners under the bus, but like if you sell your tarot deck to say Llewellyn,
Yeah.
they're just and they want to make a digital tarot, they're just going to sell it to us. Like every digital Llewellyn deck we made, like
Mhm.
that's who makes them.
Mhm.
And then we're going to pay them 50%, and they're going to pay the author and illustrator something between zero. Apparently, some
Mhm.
people make nothing
Wow.
from that, and like whatever they pay, I assume 10%, which is what, like, I don't know who's wise or not well, but like, that's what I get paid. My book is
Right.
10%.
Right.
I would assume that's what they're getting. I think they're lucky if they're getting 10%, but we're going to pay them 50, so they might as well just hold it and sell it to us or
Okay.
somebody else,
That
and
makes
their
sense.
publisher will not mind because from the
Mhm.
publisher's point of view that for that like that dollar the publisher made that's not
Mhm.
real money to them. Like they don't really care, they won't make a fuss
Right.
about it,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Right.
that's just advice to
Mhm.
anybody who makes tarot decks,
Okay.
is
That's
like you
awesome.
should keep your digital rights.
Do you think, actually, I have two questions related to that. Do you have to
Sure.
be a good reader, or do you have to be like really steeped in tarot in order to make a good deck, do you think?
I think one of you does.
One,
Like if there's an
oh, that
artist
makes
and an
sense.
author,
Right.
one
At
of you
least the
definitely
author
has
has,
to.
at least the author or at least the artist. Yeah. I
Yeah,
see.
I would say somebody has to, but like
Sure. Hmm.
I think depending, I can imagine if I was making a deck,
Hmm.
I can imagine depending on the artist I found to work with. Like there's a way in which like
Hmm.
I would just make a stick figure and be like, make art, please. But I decided exactly what was on that. Like I
Right.
already know what I want it to look like. I
Hmm.
just like my stupid hand will not
Hmm.
do that. Like I'm like, no, no, a circle. And they're like, do you mean a squiggle blob? And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, and draw a circle.
Right.
Right. And like I'm not, but I can, I know what I want. So sometimes it's
Right.
like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, the person who decides what's on the card
Hmm.
either has
Hmm.
to be deep in tarot or
Sure.
like that Liberty. I will
Hmm.
say personally, I don't know the artist who made
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Like, right. But did they have to? I don't know because somebody else already decided what was on that card for them and
Right.
they just read through it. So if it's looks like a clone and you're just artifying an existing image in your own art style,
Sure.
maybe you don't have to know that much about tarot.
Okay.
But all the
Yeah.
details matter. Like
Yes.
in a good deck, they're not random.
Right.
So again, my favorite, or not my favorite, though I'm an RWS person, but like if you look at, say, the Empress,
Hmm.
like the fact that these are pomegranates on her dress, that's not
Mm.
random. The fact that these are cypress trees and not pine trees,
Mm.
like that all matters. Those are all important choices that are relevant to this card.
Very interesting. Okay.
And like the deeper in tarot the creators are, it's better in my opinion if everybody involved is
Hmm.
deep in tarot, and ideally this is what I was saying about cross trading, deep
Mm.
and different. Like
Sure.
I think the fact that Pamela Coleman Smith and Arthur Waite had different opinions about tarot, I
Mm.
think is important. I
Okay.
know less about Frida Harris, who made
Okay.
Thoth,
Hmm.
but having seen her other art,
Hmm.
I think she is not getting enough credit for those cards.
Mm. Okay.
Like I think she brought a lot of that symbolism into those cards based only on like looking at paintings she made a long time before she made those. Like
Sure. Sure.
she clearly has like a deep like mystic.
Hmm.
Like that's not an illustrator he hired on a gig like Fiverr. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
Right.
she's also an initiate of the mysteries, as we say.
Right. Right.
And I do think that is helpful.
Hmm.
But I also think that, Thoth is, remember I was talking in the very beginning about like different ways to use tarot.
Hmm.
And like at one end I had like straight fortune telling,
Hmm.
and then way down on the other end I had like full on sorcery.
Right. Right.
Thoth is maybe better on that sorcery end. Like
Okay.
Thoth is intended to be used on that sorcery end, and it's
Yes.
actually not that great. That's straight up fortune telling. Like you have to be
Mm.
actually a quite. If your question is like, "Am I going to get this promotion at work?"
Hmm.
If you ask playing cards, it's just gonna fucking answer you. But if
Hmm.
you ask the playing cards, like, "What is the inner wisdom you have for me?" The playing cards are gonna be like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
Yeah. Right.
Right? But Thoth on the other end, it's kind of hard to get an answer. Like, am I going to get that promotion at work? It's going to be
Mhm.
like, aren't we all promoting through? No, it's going to be like, study the mysteries and all promotion comes from within. Like,
Right. Right.
okay, cool. But
Right.
like, I didn't ask for Mystic Mumbo Jumbo. I asked this very straightforward. And they all,
Mm.
different decks have different voices. And
Right.
Thoth is a quite esoteric voice. Like, those are the
Okay.
questions it's good. Just like I was saying, Deviant Moon is good at talking about like
Mm.
underhanded, sneaky stuff. Like
Okay.
Thoth deck is good at talking about like
Hmm.
esoteric mystery shit.
Right.
And
So
like
that's used for
Marseille
that
is good at
purpose.
talking about like, is this guy going to call me after our date? Like very
Uh,
practical, real world. And they're all different.
right.
And like different decks have different styles.
No,
But
that
a
makes a lot of
good
sense.
deck, a well constructed deck can
Hmm.
answer any question, can
Okay.
do anything on that spectrum. So
Hmm.
Marseille, Thoth,
Hmm.
RWS, they will do everything on that whole spectrum. They will
Okay.
answer any question about any topic.
Hmm.
And then like the less good decks get
Hmm.
maybe more.
Hmm.
Deep Moon also will answer any question. Like
Hmm.
I'm overselling it. Like that's a great deck,
Hmm.
very well constructed. But some decks, I don't even want to name a specific deck because like maybe I just don't get it. Like maybe the fact that I think it can't talk, maybe it's me. I don't know. But like
Right.
you can imagine a like
Hmm.
Crystal Kit teacher deck. Like it's going to
Yeah.
be great if I have questions about Crystal Kitten inner teachers, but I
Right.
assure you, me personally never has a question about.
Right.
Like, right?
We've seen
And
those
so
kind of ideas. Yeah. Yeah.
some decks, and isn't good. Like, so there are decks that are specialized to reading about romance.
Hmm.
There are few decks, I will say, deck creators. There are some that are really focused on answering like business and like finance questions, but not enough. Like, there's a
Okay.
real market. If somebody made a good deck, so Voyager deck
Okay.
is good for that, but that's a hard deck to read. Like, you
Okay.
got to know what you're doing to read that deck,
Okay. Okay.
right? At
Interesting.
least I think
Yeah.
it's like not a straightforward deck. It's like weird, almost surreal, like collage art. It's
Mhm.
not like this is a scene like it would be on a theater stage, which
Right.
at least I find not like a sophisticated consumer of art, perhaps.
Oh, that
I
makes
guess.
sense.
I mean,
Right.
that's not true. I love like weird abstract art, but it's definitely harder to interpret abstract art.
Yeah, that
And
makes
that deck is more abstract.
makes sense.
But that's a good business deck. There aren't as many business decks as there should be.
Okay. Do you think everybody has the ability to be good at divination, or is it something innate? Or what do you have you come across students that just like they're hopeless or like, do you think everybody at least has the potential to be an okay at divination if they,
Yes, I think everybody can
Yeah.
get. Here's what I think it's true about most things, right?
Sure,
So I'm going
sure,
to say this about divination or magic, but it's also true about like music or
sure.
math. I taught math. Does everybody have it in them to be a mathematician? No, they do not.
No.
But can everybody learn some math? Yeah, with a good teacher, which
Yes.
is a big if, at least in the United States, where many people never, like in 12 years of school, never had a good math teacher.
Yeah.
I know because I used to hire math teachers.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
And I also had a whole slew of bad ones when I was 12. Like, like I think there's a combination. I think getting good at something is some combination of like natural talent,
Hmm.
whatever that means,
Hmm.
which is maybe natural and also like childhood exposure, like early things,
Hmm.
right? And then there's an element that's like quality teaching. Like there's actual stuff and not just like a list of facts, but like real teaching and technique,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And then there's also like practice.
Yes, yes.
And I think you could be okay with any one of those things.
Okay.
And you can be good with any two of those things. But if
Hmm.
you're going to be like genuinely great at it, you probably have to do all three. So, like, I am, in terms of natural talent, like the least musical person. I mean, I guess deaf people may be worse at music than me, but
Right.
maybe not.
Right.
Right? Like, I cannot carry a tune in a bucket.
Uh-huh.
And but I know, like,
Mhm.
I'm a mathematician, so I know that if I sat down and just drilled music theory
Mhm.
and just drilled piano over and over, I could be pretty good at it
Okay.
because I can substitute like hard work
Sure.
and technical skill
Right.
for natural talent. But I
Right.
will tell you that I know even if I can't tell the difference, my
Uh-huh.
musician friends will be like, "Oh, Sarah, you play with no soul."
Right.
And
Right.
I know because as a mathematician, I
Yeah.
know what math with no soul looks like.
Interesting. Huh?
You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like, but I don't think that's really about divination. I just think that's about any
Sure.
field of human endeavor.
Makes
But
sense.
yes, like good enough to like get reasonable answers.
Hmm.
Any person can
Hmm.
learn to do that.
Hmm.
If you're gonna learn it with tarot,
Hmm.
I think probably you can't be blind. I think it would be very hard to learn tarot if you were blind. I will say
Hmm.
we have a surprising number of blind users of our tarot apps.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like
Huh.
when you download our app, you're gonna notice that like the voice prompts, like I have the voice prompts turned off, but
Hmm.
there are voice prompts that will like read each card out loud to you as it comes out and be like,
Hmm.
draw a card now.
Wow,
And
that's
I
cool.
just turn them off. Yeah, I turn them off. And when I first got involved, I'm like, can we just default to starting with them off?
Uh-huh.
And no, it turns out actually like a substantial number of blind people use our app.
Wow, that's
But
kind of cool though. That's cool. Yeah.
it's super. In the back of my head, I have this fantasy about developing like a tarot for the blind where it plays
Wow.
like little music or something
Wow.
instead of
Wow.
a picture. But
Uh-huh.
I don't know what that would be. Maybe little poems. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
that's interesting.
I think most blind people who read tarot learned tarot and then lost their sight rather than the other.
Sure.
So, like, that's the only thing I will say. To read tarot, I think you probably do have to be able to see the cards, at
Okay.
least when you're learning.
Initially, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sometimes if you're blind, you should probably pick a different style of divination. I Ching
Right.
does not have picture, like, you know what I mean? There's runes, even. You could do those
Hmm.
by feel.
Actually, I should. That's a question I had. How does tarot? I don't know how much you've explored other divination systems, I Ching or
Some, yeah,
runes,
sure.
or how do you think it? How do you
Those two less,
feel?
but many other kinds.
Okay, how do you feel it kind of compares, or what do you see? Perhaps the advantages of tarot or disadvantages, maybe if any.
So let me first
Mhm.
distinguish between, I think of there as being like two big categories of divination.
Okay.
And the one is what we call sortilege,
Hmm.
which basically means you have a relatively small number of like specific choices, and you're going to reach in a bag or whatever and pull some out.
Hmm.
So like runes and I Ching and tarot are all kinds of sortilege. And the simplest kind is flip a coin.
Okay.
Like that
Right.
divination technique. That's
Right.
like if you think about that one,
Yeah.
like tarot is really just a very sophisticated
Uh,
flipping a lot of coins,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
But then there's another kind that I briefly mentioned at the beginning,
Hmm.
which is like more free form methods,
Okay.
like automatic writing or like trance possession or like omen reading, where
Hmm.
you like maybe look at the clouds and see pictures in the clouds. Like I think
Hmm.
everybody's done that, right?
Hmm.
Like if you interpret that as a sign, then that's divination,
Hmm.
right? But it's not like there's a fixed list of things.
Right.
Maybe, I mean, a little bit there is, but mostly it's not. So you have these
Mhm.
more free form methods. And I think first let me like pro con them.
Okay.
So sortilege is easier,
Hmm.
both in the sense easier to learn and
Hmm.
easier to do.
Okay.
So like the kind of reading that like, I'm working at a festival and I'm reading tarot for
Hmm.
60 people, like
Hmm.
one every 20 minutes,
Hmm.
it's exhausting. And if I
Mm.
had to like read omens in the clouds for there's no way. There's no way I could. Like
Right.
first of all, it's like physically and mentally exhausting,
Hmm.
but also, and this is a slightly different case, I don't want to be all up in other people. Like there's like a psychic intimacy,
Hmm.
like that kind of, sometimes like I make a joke and I think other tarot readers might put you like, oh, I just put the cards on the table to make it less creepy when I read your mind. And like there is
Mm.
some element of that. But the thing
Mm.
is, I want to read everybody's mind, especially again in this situation. Like I don't do those sort of festival readings or hotline readings,
Hmm.
but I just because I just don't like them and I don't have to. But
Hmm.
when I was younger and I needed money, I definitely did. Like
Sure.
put up a table, $5, boom, 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 boom,
Right.
and do it all
Right.
in a row, right?
Right. Right.
And some people love that. Like some people like that kind of reading, whereas I would much rather like some people
Mhm.
do not want to spend an hour like deep dive consulting. They would
Right.
hate and they want to do those quickie. So it's just a matter of like personal preference and style and like
Hmm.
what kind of person you are.
Okay.
But sortilege, it provides a buffer. Like, I don't want to read, not you, but I'm going to pretend you. Like, I want to read your mind because you have all kinds of like nasty shit in your mind that I don't want to know. Like, I
Right.
don't know you and I don't
Right.
want to know you.
Right. Right. Right.
Like, just generally, I don't want to have to read, like, I don't want to have to look into the soul of every person in that line.
Sure. Sure.
And
Sure.
sortilege methods provide like a buffer that,
Mm.
like, so that's
Okay.
a
Yeah.
pro, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The other big pro of sortilege methods is they're like socially acceptable. And that's what I meant about I put the cards down to make it creepy. Like if I just look at you
Mhm.
and know your secrets,
Mhm.
ooh, no, that's how you get burned as a witch. But
Mm.
for some inexplicable reason
Mhm.
in our culture, if I just put three cards on the table and then did that, I don't even have to look at the cards. The thing I say doesn't even have to be related to the cards.
Right.
Somehow that's like allowed because we've both consented to this particular time and space where like you're just allowed to
Mm.
be creepy.
Okay,
And we
that's
don't
a
have,
good
and
point.
we can pretend that it's the cards and not that
Yeah.
I'm a creepy weirdo. But I am actually a creepy
Okay, I
weirdo.
like it. So it has
I just,
parameters, kind of. You have
yeah, and there's like a social
agreement, a
construction to
social
it.
contract. Yeah, I see.
Exactly, right?
Okay.
And our
Yeah.
culture has that for sortilege, but
Mm.
does not have that. Like in other cultures, it would be totally normal to have somebody just talk to ghosts for you. Like that
Sure.
wouldn't be weird, but our culture
Exactly.
doesn't do that. Like we don't let people, like you live in Korea, I would think that's a real thing.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's just
yeah,
a
yeah. We
thing.
have like shaman mudangs. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Mhm.
We don't I mean, maybe we're starting to a little bit, but like
Mhm.
where I grew up in like white suburbia, that was not a thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
But tarot readings, that was in movies. Like I knew about that. And
Yeah.
it wasn't like horror movies. It was just, in a
Mhm.
movie sometimes. Like you had a weird aunt who read tarot, but she wasn't like a devil worshiper. I mean, I don't know what the devil
Right, right,
worshiper,
right.
but like, you know what I mean? It's socially acceptable. So those I think are
Sure.
some pro cons. But then the con side, like one, there is a bit of a learning curve.
Sure. Mhm.
Like it takes a while to get good at. Whereas the creepy kind, you're kind of either good at or you're
Yeah,
not.
it's sort of innate almost, right? Yeah.
You can train it. Like I
Sure.
train people in it, but you do
Sure.
have to start with some kind of
You have
like,
to have a baseline to start out with,
yeah, you have
basically.
to start.
Yeah.
And also it takes a long time to learn
Mhm.
because you kind of have to watch the clouds enough to know what normal cloud shapes are and what abnormal cloud shapes are. And in
Right.
order to learn that, you got to watch clouds a lot.
Right. Okay. That
Right.
makes
So
sense.
in that sense, it's harder to learn, but tarot has more, or whatever. Sortilege has a lot of like book learning
Okay.
behind it. It's kind of a
Okay.
con.
Okay.
The other con is you're reliant on someone else's voice. And that's what
Mm.
I'm saying about like the different decks. Like
Mm.
somebody else is in between you and the information you want to know.
Right.
And like you got to know how to understand the way they say it.
Sure. Hmm.
Right. And different decks are different. And as we said, some decks are just not good at it.
Okay.
Like some decks do not communicate clearly.
Hmm.
And if you're
Hmm.
a good diviner, that's not a problem. Like I can read a
Hmm.
bad deck, I can also read clouds.
Okay.
Like I didn't really like I could also just look in your eyes and do it that way. Like I didn't
Hmm.
really so if the cards are bad, like it's not really a problem. But
Sure.
I lose out on all the benefits of it.
Sure. Hmm. Hmm.
Right.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
I would say like that the real pro con is that tarot is essentially multiple choice.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like it's only got 78 words. It has to tell you with those 78 words. And until you're quite good at it, like
Hmm.
its ability to communicate complicated nuance
Hmm.
relies on you being quite fluent in that language.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right. Whereas the free form kind, like you get out answers. Do those answers make sense or not? You know, it
Sure.
depends on how good you are at it.
Sure.
But in some sense, it's easier and you get more like
Hmm.
certain kinds of information. So, like, if I'm asking a demon to tell me its name, it's like
Hmm.
pretty hard to get that out of
Hmm.
tarot. I'm just
Sure.
going to get the devil card. And then eventually it's going to resort every major arcana is assigned to a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And I know, having done this, it will start spelling things, but it can't because it only has one Aleph card. So if there's two Alephs in its name, you're just fucked, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
whereas,
Right.
like the other forms, you get more free form results, but that
Hmm.
also means it's easier to introduce your own bias. It's just
Hmm.
harder,
Okay.
right? So that's what I would say. Okay, so now if we talk about tarot
Hmm.
relative to other sortilege,
Okay. Okay.
right? Tarot, one of the things I like about it,
Hmm.
especially I strongly prefer full scene pips. Like
Full
the
what?
reason I oh, pip is the number. Like the cards
Oh,
that are in playing cards, the number cards are called
okay.
pips.
Okay, I see.
And I like it when they have full scenes on them
I see. I see.
versus when they just have a number.
Okay.
So for me, like I like that element because it lets me bring in
Hmm.
some of that like cloud scrying in a way that is
Hmm.
harder, but not impossible, but harder to
Sure.
do without the pip. So
Okay.
like I think tarot does a good job. It brings in like
Hmm.
it kind of bridges the gap between the two methods.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Now I am open to the criticism. Like,
Hmm.
here's what I will say. I read I Ching kind of.
Okay. Hmm.
I've seen expert I Ching
Hmm.
readers,
Hmm.
and I'm pretty sure that actually it's pretty by the book. That if you put the
Okay.
same three I Ching
Hmm.
like hexagrams in front of three people, they're going to give
Hmm.
you quite similar answers
Okay.
in a way. But you know, now that I say that, no, I don't think. I
Hmm.
think it's the same way that like two tarot readers,
Hmm.
like the cards mean a thing, but we're going to get out slightly different things because we're good at our job. So
Mm,
maybe I was gonna say that tarot does that better than like, but I don't think that's true. I think I just don't know I Ching and runes well enough to do that.
okay. Okay.
Right. So
Yeah. Yeah.
different. Here's what I guess. Here's what I'm gonna back up. I'm gonna say that for me, of like the big traditional, like well developed, and I will say runes shouldn't be in this category.
Okay.
Like I Ching has 1,000 years of history as a divination tool.
Hmm. Hmm.
Tarot has 500 years of history as a divination tool.
Hmm.
Runes were not used for divination in ancient Norway. There's no evidence to support that. Like
Right.
it's a modern phenomenon.
Hmm.
And so like it is becoming better developed. I think.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm not an expert. So
Hmm.
like please feel free to mansplain to me in the comments, but only if you are an expert.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like I could
Yeah.
totally be wrong,
Right.
right? I mean, you saw I couldn't even produce exact dates for tarot, and
Right.
definitely I'm not a specialist in like
Ruins and
early
stuff. Yeah.
Scandinavian paganism or
Sure.
whatever.
Sure. Sure.
But I believe it's quite actually quite a new system.
Okay.
And but even that, right? It's like enough people have done it that kind of you know, we figured out how to do it.
Sure. Sure.
I think probably they all I do not know any of those. Like
Hmm.
again, I can read runes and I can read I Ching, but not the
Hmm.
way I read tarot. So I
Hmm.
guess I was gonna give pro cons, but I'm gonna say that like I don't know enough about
About
them.
those. Okay. Okay.
But what I would say is my guess is
Hmm.
that like the thing about tarot is that remember what I was saying about Bible stories and you
Yeah.
know them even if like if you grew up speaking English, you know those stories.
Sure.
Well, that's like not the case with I Ching if you didn't grow up in that
Mhm.
culture. Like
Right.
there's also this whole complex Taoist mythology that I like
Uh-huh.
sort of know.
Right, right,
but
right.
I'm not like
Fair.
enmeshed in it. And no, and the runes, there's
Mhm,
this whole complex culture that like actually nobody's fully immersed in. Nobody grew up in that culture.
mhm,
Actually, what you're like reconstructing is like early Christian explanations of that culture. Like, so
mhm,
that's a benefit of tarot is that like it
mhm,
was designed in Italy, like
okay.
Renaissance Italy, which is a lot closer to for people listening in English, like
Right.
whose native language is English. It's like closer to what you're used to.
Sure, sure.
Right. And also it's like woven and it goes both directions. The tarot has also influenced our culture, right?
Hmm, hmm.
Like you see it in like music videos, right?
Right,
And I
right.
think that is a real benefit of tarot versus other systems.
Okay. Yeah, that
But
makes
tarot versus say like playing cards,
sense.
I think it's what I said before, right? That playing cards have a very like
Hmm,
no nonsense, practical, matter of fact kind of voice.
hmm. Okay.
But like it's hard to get mystic mumbo jumbo out of them. You can, like
Hmm.
I'm good at it, so I can. People who are good
Yeah.
at it, like any professional diviner who's good at their job, they can do that. But
Right.
like as a beginner, it's going to be harder to get them. Whereas out of say Thoth, you just
Hmm.
get nothing but mystic mumbo jumbo,
Right, right,
right?
right.
And like it's hard to get it to answer very straightforward, like what's
Questions.
going to happen at my job,
Right,
like
right, right.
should I take this loan kind of questions. Like
Right,
no, you should
right.
like being in debt is spiritual bondage. Like okay, thanks cards, but that's like
Right,
not the question I asked you.
right, right, right. Yeah.
Right? And so that I think like versus other systems, and that is also true with like tarot versus I Ching or tarot versus runes.
Hmm, hmm.
But I think that's just about becoming fluent
Okay.
in the system.
Okay. Do you think there's an area of tarot that's like less explored? You know, you talked about divination, you talked about using them for sorcery, a little bit about like scrying the cards, right? And for other
I
means. Do you
think
think there's
straight
another, yeah, another use for them that is less used but could be more
I
explored?
think sorcery actually people don't do that a lot.
Okay.
I mean, they do some kinds of sorcery, but one thing that I do with tarot cards that maybe other people do and maybe just none of us talk about it,
Hmm,
but I will sometimes, especially for a bigger ritual,
hmm.
we kind of use the cards as co-magicians.
Mm, okay.
So like I'm doing the magic, but I wish I had a hierophant over here who was holding down
Hmm.
this corner. And
Right.
I sort of like awaken them as like people,
Okay.
like
Okay.
co-magicians, and I will like build a circle out of them,
Mm, okay. Okay.
kind of. And maybe other people do that and they don't talk about it. I also, it occurs to me, have maybe never said out loud that I do that.
Oh, that's interesting.
I mean,
Okay.
it's a
That's one.
secret. I'm just saying, I don't,
Yeah.
it feels like it would be hard to teach somebody. I feel like you maybe have to be pretty good at tarot
Okay.
to
Kind of.
do. I don't think about it, but off the top of my head as a teacher, I would be hard pressed to teach people
Hmm.
more than I just straight up just said. Like, I don't know how else
Hmm.
to tell you how to do that more than I just said.
Sure.
So that might be why we're not teaching it. It feels like a hard thing to teach, but I'll think about it. Maybe I'll figure out how to teach it.
Okay.
So that's something I think that it, but I also, especially today's
Hmm,
just ritual fortune telling,
hmm.
I think a lot of people today, especially in maybe the last like 20 years,
Hmm.
are thinking about tarot as a like prompt for your inner wisdom.
Hmm.
Or like, oh, you just look at the cards and they're a trigger for your subconscious. Like, okay, cool. Like, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that or that's
Hmm.
bad,
Hmm.
but that's not fortune telling. Like, that's not what those cards were designed to do.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like, that's not what fortune telling is. And fortune telling is like an actual thing. And it's
Hmm.
the thing tarot cards are for. Like, if you wanted journal prompts,
Hmm.
there's things that are like meant for that. Like, say, the Psalms. Like, if what you want is like a deep experience of like the divine universe or like
Hmm.
what does the universe have planned for me,
Yeah.
I think you'd get more value out of reading psalms or
Hmm.
like not specifically psalms or orphic hymns or like
Hmm.
something that is designed to provoke that experience, whereas tarot was
Hmm.
designed to tell you if you're going to get that promotion. I mean, it
Right.
wasn't, it was designed to play games. That's another thing that I think
Yeah. Uh-huh.
barely know how to play taroki. Like that's another aspect of them that I think is like
Oh yeah, yeah,
people,
yeah. There is an actual game associated with them, right?
there's a specific game which I
Yeah.
learned in Italy in July
Karaoke. Yeah, I think there's even a book on
and
it.
not well. Yeah, I
Right,
mean
right,
there are other games you play, and
right.
there's games I've made up with tarot cards.
Right.
But honestly, I should probably learn to play that game. I bet it would. I bet I'd learn a lot about tarot if I learned to play that game better.
Right.
Italian people like at me because apparently Italians all know how to play that game. It's just like a
Oh,
normal
interesting. I didn't know
thing.
that. Okay. Huh.
And that's what my Italian friends say. But all my Italian friends are witches, so I don't
Oh,
know
okay,
how true.
okay. Yeah. Right, right,
Like
right.
at least I think older. I think it's maybe less out of it. But the same way, like all of our grandparents know how to play bridge.
That makes
Like
sense. And
it's
nobody
just a
knows.
game that they play.
Right, right, right.
And
Okay.
I think Italy, but I think broadly Europe.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
Europeans broadly, the connection between playing cards and tarot cards
hmm
is closer,
Okay. Okay.
even in terms of like what the suits are named, closer
hmm
than it is in the United States, where they're quite distinct.
Okay. Makes sense. All right. Can you share a bit about your tarot course that's just about to
Yeah.
start or just started actually?
Yeah, so the course is called The Devil's Picture Book, which is like an old timey name for tarot from people who don't like it. So, The
hmm
Devil's Picture Book, Getting Good at Tarot. And
hmm
so it's designed for people who are like not the 100% beginner that I was talking about, where you're just like, you open the deck and you just read what it says out of the book and
hmm
like, good.
hmm
Right. But for people who are like, maybe they're already at that level and they want to like these things I'm talking about, they're like, oh, I don't, how do I get to that? The
Right.
course is to get good at it. Like,
Right.
you have some kind of baseline. We're not
hmm
going to like, you know, I mean, we do actually. There's a boot camp, a free boot camp on
Okay.
YouTube. If you
Boot camp.
like, where you could get the beginning parts,
Sure,
right?
sure, sure.
But and so we cross train,
hmm
right? So it's me on RWS and Marco on Marseille. So
hmm
you see two different styles,
hmm
and it's a year-long course.
hmm
You can learn more about it at www.witchlessons.com.
hmm
The lesson zero was just this past Sunday. It was free to come live, but too
hmm
late for that. But now you can get a video,
hmm
which will be on by the time this video is up. I think
hmm
it'll be on YouTube as well. Like I'm going to finish editing it tonight and
Oh,
put it
cool.
on.
Okay.
So
hmm
that one will be there so for people can see like what the class is like. They'll see both Marco and I teach, but
hmm
after lesson zero, like I teach a lesson
hmm
and then he teaches the same material
hmm
differently, like different style, or vice versa. Like sometimes he goes first. It just depends on our schedule. Right. And so we'll walk you through all different kinds. And it's really designed for, remember what I was saying about when you only read for yourself, it's harder?
hmm
I think that's one place where a lot of tarot teaching kind of falls apart. Like, I
hmm
think when you think about tarot as like a person and they are reading for a client that they don't know,
hmm hmm
that is where you get good at tarot. Because partly you can't cheat, you can't like already know that person's life, but
hmm
also you get a lot of feedback,
hmm
right? That you don't get otherwise.
hmm
So like if I'm reading for a friend and
hmm
I pull like spooky details about their life,
hmm
I don't it's not like I don't get confirmation like, oh yeah, this is like weird spooky shit. Because
hmm
I already knew all the details of their life. But
hmm
when I'm reading for a stranger and
hmm
I'm like, oh, your uncle who recently died, is his name Ivan? And they're like, oh, that's not my uncle, that's my old cousin.
hmm
I'm like, oh, okay. And then we move on. Like you get this sense of like, oh, this is real. This is like
Right.
magic and it's real. And
Right.
that will happen. If you read for a lot of people and you have even a little bit of skill, that
hmm
will happen pretty regularly.
hmm hmm
And that kind of validation and feedback, I think, is essential to the learning process. I think there's no way to get it when you're only reading for yourself. Like it's
hmm
never, it's never miraculous when you predict your own future
Yeah.
because you're all up in it. Like you already know what's going to happen. So it's
Right.
not like when you're like, oh, I was right. Yeah, what I thought was going to happen happened. Like, yeah, that's most of the time, actually.
Right.
But when other people's lives that you don't know anything about, you're pulling those details, it you just learn faster.
Yeah, makes
So
sense.
that's another thing that's like about our course is we're both coming at it from the position of like professional tarot readers
hmm
reading for strangers and
hmm
like fortune telling, which is the
Okay.
essence learning to read tarot in a mystic way,
hmm
learning to read tarot like to speak with spirits.
hmm
All of that is built on a foundation, I think,
hmm
of fortune telling. But
Okay.
a lot of times I see like the way we talk about tarot in our community now,
hmm
I feel like they sort of skip that fortune telling step. And you can tell that they did. Like the results they're getting, it's
mm
clear.
hmm
I mean, not all of them, but like,
hmm
especially people who like that's how they learned it.
hmm
Like they're really good at using them for journal prompts, but they can't actually tell fortunes with them.
mm
And if they could, they'd be better journal prompts too. Like it would
Right.
improve that as well. So those are, I think, like things that differentiate our course is the
hmm
cross training element and the like real focus on fortune telling.
Okay. Okay. And
as the
is there
essence
like
of
homework
divination.
assignments? Like you got to do this
There,
week. You got
yeah.
to.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. There are optional homework. Like we have no
Okay.
power to force people to do
Yeah,
things.
sure, sure.
So like, I mean, and from my point of view, I will say from my course, but also anything. Like if you're not caught up, you should still come to a live lesson if you can.
Yeah,
Like even
yeah.
if you're not caught up, just come.
Hmm.
Right? Like just because you haven't done your homework, you should still go to class because you're just gonna get
Sure.
even further behind. But
Exactly.
there are homeworks and there are also exercises we do in class.
Hmm.
And because it's a live class with other people, you get assigned, you don't get assigned, you get to build your own like
Hmm.
study buddy or
Hmm.
like partner that you trade readings with. And we do have exercises
Okay.
to like build on. And there's like a group where we can all talk to each other.
Oh, that's perfect.
And
Okay.
I think in any of my classes, I think that's why they're worth that's what makes them better than a $20 book, right? Like
Yeah,
that's what
right.
you pay for is all that live access, the ability to ask as many questions as you want of
Hmm.
me as a teacher, but also as your fellow students.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like you get to build a practice together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. All right. Any other final tips? Any other things you want to mention? Upcoming projects? Anything else?
Okay, so I have other things. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about other things I do,
Sure,
right?
sure, sure.
So I'm always teaching Introduction to Witchcraft and
Okay.
Planetary Pentacles of Solomon.
Hmm.
Those are year-long courses, but you get all the back videos, and
Hmm.
they just started. Like the semester
Okay.
just started at Halloween, so it's
Hmm.
actually plenty of time, like easy to catch up
Hmm.
in a way that it's going to get less. Like eventually, you're going to maybe have to wait.
Right, right.
But at this point, like we've only done 3 lessons,
Okay,
and they're
okay.
the easy ones because they're in the beginning, so
Pretty
easy to
early,
catch
yeah.
up.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, and then I also have a bunch of like one-shot lessons. In terms
Mhm.
of live appearances,
Mhm.
I will be at Convocation in Ypsilanti, which I think is such a fun name to say, Ypsilanti, Michigan, which is basically suburban Detroit. As a person who's
Okay.
not from there, I consider it
Sounds
to be
cooler
suburban.
than Detroit, though. Upsalanti, yeah.
It's just a
Yeah,
fun word to say.
yeah,
Ann
yeah.
Arbor. I,
Yeah.
I will say, as a person not from there, I do not understand the difference between Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor. But one
Okay.
time I said Convocation was in Ann Arbor and not Ypsilanti, which is like a mile and a half worth of difference, and people lost their mind. So it must be some description that if I was from Michigan, I would know about.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, that's February 20th through 23rd.
Okay.
I am teaching introductory Goetia, so like we're gonna summon a demon. I'm
Oh,
teaching
cool. Okay.
Kabbalat Shabbat, so like the
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 people who
Jewish
go
ritual.
live can actually see it, experience it.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. Oh, that's great. Okay, okay.
yeah,
Great.
100%. Like they'll be in the room there while we do it.
Awesome. Okay.
Um, Kabbalat Shabbat, which is like a Jewish ritual of receiving the Sabbath, which is
Okay.
actually like a deeply mystic experience. Doing
Okay.
that Friday night, and then I am teaching Sefer HaOtot, which is a Hebrew manuscript of Pentacles.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And then
Okay.
in late March,
Hmm.
in the comments, we'll have some exact dates for you that
Hmm.
off the top of my head.
Okay.
It's about the same time. It's like the last weekend in March,
Hmm.
I think. Um, I will be in again what I consider to be suburban Baltimore.
Hmm.
I think it's called Hunt Valley,
Okay.
Maryland.
Okay.
And I am teaching honestly almost the same stuff.
Okay.
I think I'm teaching the Goetia and the Sefer HaOtot, but not Kabbalat Shabbat, and instead
Hmm.
some other third thing, maybe Orphic hymns. I don't know what the third thing I'm teaching. I guess I should figure that out before
Hmm.
March.
Hmm. Yeah, you mentioned, I mean, we can chat about this another time. You
Yeah,
teach
sure.
Jewish magic as well. You mentioned the,
I don't teach a lot of it.
okay.
I teach a lot of Hebrew magic,
Oh, Hebrew magic. I'm
right?
sorry.
So
Yeah.
like, well, no, I mean I teach both, but they're not exactly the same, I guess. So
Hmm.
like, but I'm thinking about maybe teaching a little more Jewish magic. People would like me to teach more Jewish magic, so maybe I will.
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know. I
Okay,
just don't.
maybe.
But so I teach a little bit of Kabbalah and I teach pentacles, which are a kind of Hebrew amulet,
Okay.
which are not exclusively Jewish.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, at Convocation in
Mhm.
particular, I tend to teach Jewish magic. Partly there's like a lot of Jews at that convention, but
Mhm.
also they have like a Kabbalistic theme
Okay.
for the last couple of years that makes me like want to lean into that end of teaching. So, but I
Yeah.
do teach that. Um, yeah. And if there's, oh, actually, here I'll make an announcement that
Okay.
we actually went public today.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sure.
I have two exciting announcements. One,
Okay.
my next book, Introduction to Witchcraft.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
13 lessons in practical magic. So this is the textbook for my intro course that I've been teaching for a
Oh,
long time.
nice.
Pre-orders went live yesterday.
Oh, sweet.
Go
Okay.
on the
Okay.
Crossed Crow, which is my publisher website.
Okay.
They'll be live. I don't know when like you could order it also on like Barnes and Noble or Amazon or
Sure.
all kinds of terrible, heartless corporations that put authors out of business. But
Yeah.
like it'll be available there in a month or two for pre-order. That book will be out at Halloween. But that's not what I was gonna say. My colleague and friend Halo and I
Uh-huh.
are thinking about a course called Howling for Beginners,
Okay.
which would be Goetia, but specifically Goetia in a sense of like
Hmm.
vocal magic, right? So like oration, like magic where you use your voice to call spirits.
That sounds pretty cool. Okay.
Um,
Okay.
but what so if you think that's interesting, tell us to teach that. We're
Yeah.
still very much in the planning phase. It's probably in the spring.
Okay.
Maybe we'll
That
start
sounds
teaching.
cool. That sounds cool. All
But
right.
if you're into it, the more people who tell us they're into it, the further up the priority list it'll get bumped.
Makes sense. Yeah. Cool.
But
Cool. And
that
then,
that we just decided that this afternoon.
oh, sweet. Okay. Cool. I can include all the information
Yeah.
in the show
Well, there's
notes.
no
And then,
information about that.
yeah. Oh, not that
We
one
made it
yet.
up
But
as it.
in terms of your book that's coming out, that the link's already live in terms of you can pre-order. Um.
Yeah, yeah. So if you put my name, so it's on Crossed Crow. I mean, we'll have a link for you. The
Sure.
Crossed Crow books, you can pre-order paperbacks or hardbacks.
Hmm. Hmm.
But the ebook, I think you can't. I mean, the book won't be
Hmm.
out till October. So,
Okay.
I
Okay.
mean, I'd love it if you guys ordered early, but from my point of view,
Yeah.
there's really no difference between you pre-ordering now and pre-ordering in March or buying it
Sure.
in October,
Sure.
right?
Okay.
But you can convince my publisher that I'm awesome if you do a lot of pre-orders, I guess. I
Yeah.
guess ebook. What I'm saying is ebook pre-orders are not up yet.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know. I'm not
Hmm.
like at Fool's Dog. I'm the publisher, so I get to see all the businessy end. At
Hmm.
my publisher, I
Hmm.
don't know. I give them 90% of the profits of the book, so I don't have to deal with that part.
Yeah. Right.
So,
Right. Right.
like,
Right.
whatever. I don't know when it'll be up. I would imagine next month. We
Okay.
put it up early because of convocation. Like, we wanted to get the link out before convocation.
Okay.
That's
Sounds.
why we're pre-ordering in January for a book that comes out in October.
All right, cool, cool. All right, sounds good. Well, this has been a good chat. I
Yeah,
personally, I learned a
I had a
lot
lot of
too.
fun.
Yeah,
Thank you
definitely
so
learned a lot
much.
about divination in general, and yeah, I'll include all the stuff in the show notes. And so, until next time.
Awesome.
Yeah, all right, take it
Becky,
easy.
thank you for
Yeah.
having me.